Good afternoon. This is Eric Mucklow, Building Technology Program Manager at Headquarters Corps of Engineers. Today we will be speaking about the Fort Leonard Wood's Installation Strategic Sustainability Plan process. In 2010, a 25-year vision for the Fort Leonard Wood Garrison was developed, as well as supporting goals, objectives, and action plans. This vision became a key component in their Installation Strategic Sustainability Plan, ISSP. To optimize performance with respect to the mission benefit, cost, resource conservation, and community well-being. To talk to us today, we have a whole cadre of professionals. Mark Premont, he has served as the Director of Plans, Analysis, and Integration Office there at Fort Leonard Wood since 2003, and he's the installation's focal point for the developing, planning, and coordinating and directing of the strategic planning efforts of the Fort Leonard Wood Garrison. Also with us is Kevin Palmer. Kevin Palmer is the Director of the Center for Sustainable Solutions and has supported Fort Leonard Wood since 2010 in the implementation of their sustainability plan, including the development of an integrated system projects that support multiple long-term goals. Annette Stumpf is a research architect and principal investigator at our Construction Engineering Research Lab, CERL. She is a leader in CERL's sustainable design and development research effort, focused on energy conscious design, sustainable design and development, and improving planning processes and design charrettes. Also joining us is Sue Bevelheimer. Sue Bevelheimer is a community planner and project manager also at CERL. Her efforts include installation sustainability planning and implementation and Clean Water Act related environmental compliance. The webinar is being recorded, and it will be uploaded to our video channel that can be accessed from the Sustainability and Energy website. In the box on the right-hand side of the screen, there's a link to the Mercy site. The Energy and Sustainability website is hosted on Mercy. If you would like learning units for those architects and other registered professionals or CEUs, they are available by filling out a quiz in blocks of 5 webinars. I believe this one wraps up a block, and returning it along with your AI number as applicable to Andy T. Meyer, whose email address is on the screen. I will now switch the presentation over to Mark Premont to begin the discussion.
Today what we're going to do, if you go on to the next slide, or you can see the slides, we're going to go through a little bit of the history of the ISSP and how that was formed and what we did at Fort Leonard Wood, give you some idea of the goals and some of the ongoing projects, and then the most detailed part of the discussion, and that's going to handle talking about some very specific CERL projects that are ongoing and some of the lessons learned so far from those over the last 4 years. The Strategic Sustainability Plan fits in as part of the Installation Garrison Strategic Plan. As you can see, they've got integrated, that strategic plan is designed to support all the various Army goals that an installation would support. The sustainability plan was formed in 2010 using IMCOM's ABCDF GHIJK strategic planning model, and was designed specifically to support installations trying to figure out how to integrate a long-term component into their strategic plan along lines of sustainability.
The idea, of course, is that what we're doing is we're incorporating the sustainability plan and nesting within the other plans, within the Army plan, within the IMCOM plan, within the Energy plan, within the Maneuver Support Center of Excellence plan. That we want this to be an integral part of that, so that the things that we're working on also support those other plans. That was the aspect of this slide that we're looking at. And the whole idea is that by having these quarterly sessions, then we feed into the normal battle rhythm of the activities that are going on the installation. What this is meant to show is our overall energy strategy. That was part of the old LOE4, assured access to energy. The LOEs are changing in some of the plans that we're nesting into. But as part of this, what we were looking for is, obviously there's a way ahead that we're going to be looking at reducing consumption, increasing efficiency. There's some master planning aspects that you're going to see in this presentation. Incorporating the net zero, all of these things are going to affect our overall energy strategy, along with where we buy energy and some reduction in energy use that we get. And of course, any renewables that we're able to bring to bear, and reducing the adverse environmental impacts. But part of that is that we have to have a knowledge base that we're working from. A lot of the new technologies, you have a plethora of new methods and techniques that you could use. Which ones are going to have the greatest payback? Which ones are worth pursuing in detail? What is the magnitude of that effort that's going to take us in order for that to be effective? That was the lack of understanding that we have. Now, of course, you have salesmen that show up at your door all the time, and they've got a great idea about how, you know, this item or that item is going to be the answer to your prayers. But what we wanted to have is we wanted to have the people at CERL really put forth an effort and provide some data that we can make some reasonable decisions about how we were going to proceed. And this not only applies to our energy strategy, but imagine the same graph for water, waste, and for all the things that affect what we're doing.
Okay, this is Kevin again, and I'll go ahead and give a little bit of background on the ISSP, the Army Installation Strategic Sustainability Planning process. In May of 2000, Forces Command gathered at Fort Hood to sort of start to figure out what the next iteration or next step forward on the concept of pollution prevention would be. And given direction from the command at FORSCOM, they really were focused on the concept of sustainability. Bunch of the FORSCOM installations participated in the initial development of the strategic sustainability or sustainability planning process that was first done at Fort Bragg in 2001. Since then, 42 other Army installations and National Guard states have gone through the process to define, you know, how they want to look forward, as opposed to a more traditional strategic plan, which is really geared towards the POM cycle. Sustainability really looks at that longer term component. What do you do in the out years? Where do you want to be 10, 15, 20 years down the road? So in 2009, Kansas City District asked CERL's help on the ISSP or in doing sustainability planning for the installation. That's when CERL came to me, because CERL in conjunction with FORSCOM and then subsequent other components that did sustainability, CERL supported that, and they knew me from there since I've been working on it since 2000, and they pulled me in and the center in. So we've been supporting, both CERL and the center have been supporting Fort Leonard Wood in the ISSP, both the planning side and the implementation, since 2010. The ISSP process follows the ABCD strategic planning model with a longer term component added in that's really geared towards sustainability. You can see the schedule that we follow at Fort Leonard Wood, starting back in November of 2009, with sort of the final planning step being concluded in September of 2011. And since then, the teams have been meeting on a quarterly basis to talk about sustainability progress and issues and opportunities, again on a quarterly basis since we did that. 2013 was the first year that we wrote a Fort Leonard Wood annual report on sustainability. I think that's one of the file shares that's with this as well. So if you want to look at that, feel free. I think you can download it as part of this discussion. The process includes goal setting. As I said, quarterly meetings are held with each goal team. We've got another set of quarterly meetings coming up in September. We talk about special topics. Oftentimes there will be a day set aside where we deal with things like energy or water. We've done transportation, where we've also done some demonstrations on some emerging new electric vehicles and automated vehicles. I'll talk more about that in just a bit. And then other topics like deconstruction, other people's money. How do we partner with getting funds for some of the sustainability programs that really border on lots of different potential missions for other organizations like USDA or others. We've included over time, CERL obviously works with the Corps of Engineers, but over time the Kansas City district has become more and more engaged in sustainability, and Annette's got a few case studies that she'll mention a little bit later on. The idea behind this is to, as I said before, integrate strategic, integrate a long-term component to the strategic plan that really is looking at the out years. Traditionally, Army planning has looked at things like the master plan as a long-term component because you're talking about how you're going to develop the area and how you're going to develop the cantonment area and protect the ranges. This is really the sustainability component of the strategic plan, is really that step forward on all the other programs. How do you ensure that you're going to have a workforce to do the work, you know, now and into the future? How do you look at resources and make sure that you have them into the future? We have an annual report, as I mentioned. There's the cover of it, and again, you can take a look at that going forward to see the kinds of stuff. And I would, you know, there's lots of installations that have gone through this. There are a lot of different installations that have been doing annual reports, and some of the installations like a Joint Base Lewis McChord or Fort Bragg have been doing this now for over a decade. So they've got a lot more data to report. So if you're trying to figure some of this out and how it could apply to you, then I would suggest not only looking at our annual report, but also take a look at some of these other installations as well. For Fort Leonard Wood, there are 6 goal teams. The first is on infrastructure. There's one on mission services, community engagement. How do we, you know, help the community in terms of being resilient? In other words, a happy community. A cultural pride in the workforce, and then training lands and ranges, which are obviously critical in terms of conducting the mission now and into the future. As we've developed not only the goals, but then looking at solutions, we've looked more and more towards developing systems that are really geared towards creating a sustainable installation. So when you look at some of these things, what you're talking about are projects that will support multiple goals. Things like the JLUS, which actually was done recently with our community partners last year, was finished, obviously have a direct impact on training land and land usage outside the installation with respect to things like ACUB. At the same time, the master plan and how you condense the cantonment area also obviously is about saving space for training areas. So when you start to look at those things together, you identify additional activities that can help support something like a long-term ACUB plan. We're looking at, for instance, to help the community have more recreational opportunities, developing a set of trails in the national forests that are adjacent to and on the boundaries of the installation. Those play a role ultimately in how we develop the ACUB plan going forward. Similarly, as we look at transportation systems and we're looking at automated robotic vehicles, those also play a role in how we move people around the post and limit the number of vehicles that we have driving around the post as a means to not only reduce the amount of parking we have to have over the long term, but also encourage a more efficient use of common facilities like dining facilities. So we're looking at lots of different projects, all of which are supportive and self-supportive of all 6 of the goals that have been established. Infrastructure being a critical one, it's the place, it's where we have our long-term master plan, plays a really important role to all of this, not only just in the buildings, but also the space and then all the resources that we use. So as I said, Annette will be talking about that in a great more detail, because that's one of the primary roles that CERL's been playing in terms of helping this installation look at more sustainable infrastructure. So with that, I'm just going to quickly go through each of the different goals. You can read the objectives, but goal 1 is really about infrastructure. It talks a lot about how we're going to build a campus out. That actually started prior to the ISSP when a previous commanding general really emphasized the idea of this being a schoolhouse and how do we build out campuses to encourage keeping all the functions in small walkable areas as opposed to having them spread out all over the cantonment area. Second objective, as you can see, is all about energy and water. How do we protect those resources for current and future use? And then modernization. Over time, how do we start to build out a more efficient set of campuses for the installation and its training functions? As we mentioned before, or mentioned in addition, we recently have updated the master plan. That happened 18 to 24 months ago, and one of the big elements of it was how do we start to consolidate the cantonment area into a central corridor, into a central community. The idea would be to increase density and space by creating a downtown corridor. That's sort of the upper right side of the diagram that you have in front of you. We have a new privatized Army lodging facility coming in where you can see the yellow box. So the corridor would really function right along one central area of the installation that right now is not particularly dense or well developed. It's close to the PX right here. And the idea is that eventually we would build a new commissary in the area, as well as develop this space to include mixed-use development. The idea being that we would have services on the first level, but whether they be commercial services or Army services, administrative and educational and training space, basically offices in the second and third floor potentially, and then on the top layer put housing. So again, this would look something like the types of mixed-use developments that we've had at places like Fort Belvoir, Joint Base Lewis McChord has done some of this as well, but it's on I presume, a fairly large scale because we're really looking at, our first cut is looking at about 21 or 22 buildings that are currently in the real property plan, eliminating those and taking those functions and building them into this downtown, along with housing, along with other services and retail. CERL has done some net zero energy modeling again, and Annette will talk more about this in just a few minutes, but has done some additional modeling. And what we're really looking at is if we build this out efficiently in a high performance way, using high performance design, we should be able to get about the same amount of energy used for double the amount of space that would have done in the older buildings. In addition to that, we would free up several hundred acres of land for use in things like close-in training, or could be used for close-in training and other functions. So it's kind of a big project where we started to model it, and we started to engage with the folks in privatization partnerships as ACUB on how to go about doing this, potentially with our RCI partner. Fort Leonard Wood has already done a fair amount of work. As you can see, there's a pretty long list of LEED certified projects. We've been working on these for quite a while, and all of the buildings now are looking more towards silver and gold where we can. We've had some pretty neat successes with our unaccompanied soldier housing, where we've got a lot of apartment-like buildings that are meeting the LEED Gold standard and have good walkability to that central corridor. Goal 2 is mission services. Again, these are the objectives. They look at things like how we feed soldiers, how we provide logistical support, how we're going to upgrade our deployment capabilities, and then in and out processing, and then also non-tactical fleet that really is providing that optimal performance with minimal impact to the environment. Had a fair amount of success so far in terms of reducing the fleet size, probably out of requirement more than desire, but we've also started to deploy electric vehicles. As part of this, one of our big projects currently is looking at the idea of automated transit systems to move soldiers around post. We estimate that we have a couple of million soldier trips around post every year, and so we're trying to reduce that number, and in doing so, increase our ability to maybe efficiently move soldiers and reduce the number of active dining facilities, which actually has potential for a fair savings for that operation. One of the projects, all of these are being done in conjunction with TARDEC under the Automated Robotics Program, or REBO is the acronym. But in any case, one of the projects is a continuous meal service, which is the one I've just mentioned, moving soldiers between dining facilities to provide them opportunities to eat, but not have quite as many dining facilities open. Second is a convoy lunch system, where we're moving soldiers that we currently move using diesel vehicles. We'd move them in automated vehicle systems from about four miles each way from a remote training area that doesn't have dining capability. The third is a system to move materiel from areas in the cantonment area down to the training areas. The fourth is one that would be done in conjunction or partnership with our local community to move the 250,000 visitors we get each year from off-post on to on-post graduation ceremonies. We have graduations Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday of every week. Goal 3 is on community engagement. The primary one here is that there's a sister organization that represents a community or works with the community on regional sustainability issues. It's called the Sustainable Ozarks Partnership, and it's moving towards all of these different objectives through projects that it's doing outpost or off-post, and then project that we support on-post. They have a website. Feel free to go take a look at it. Goal number 4 is service members, families, and civilians resilient in mind, body, and spirit, and this is exactly what you would expect to be. How do we increase the morale of the community inside the fence line and make sure that they have all the opportunities they need? Things like the external trail system is one of the big ones that we're looking at, and how we partner up with the U.S. Forest Service to produce a series of trails that will give people more opportunities to exercise out and about the area, as well as increase potential visitors' recreational activities as well. So you see that these objectives really are geared towards how do we provide facilities and services, and how do we make sure that people are healthy in mind, body, and spirit. One of the big projects under this is sustainable food. We've been looking at vertical farming for both on-post and off-post production. The region already has a couple of controlled environment agricultural facilities that can provide us a healthy food source all year long. In addition, we're looking in terms of food security for larger production facilities for vertical farming. For example, the commissary uses the dining facilities use about 50,000 pounds of lettuce a month. So the idea of a vertical farm that could provide us that as a secure source on post, it's about a 20,000 square foot building footprint, so it's not very big. It's a megawatt of power, so that's another concern. So we're looking at things like sustainable food, vertical farming. We're looking at veteran-to-farmer training. We actually have been awarded a grant from USDA to help develop a veteran-to-farmer training program, looking at community gardening and a farmer's market. Another grant application is in on that with USDA as well. Additional things to help our workforce, we've joined up with VRIDE. This is not an uncommon thing. A lot of installations have companies like this. VRIDE establishes a relationship with riders and puts them in the opportunity to be in van pools. The statistics are kind of impressive. We've saved a lot of drivers' fuel, saved a lot of cost, and we've saved a fair amount of CO2 emissions. Goal 5 is about workforce. This is always a tough goal to work with, but we're pushing forward on some different projects with respect to this, about education on sustainability. We have a van pooling video that's going out as well, and looking at internships with the local universities, as well as organizations, to provide people opportunities to get an experience working on post, and at the same time help us promote more sustainable behavior. Goal 6 is on training lands. Our big push right now on this one is on the ACUB. You'll see that as I said before, we just completed our JLUS last year. We're updating the master plan to reflect some of those things, but these different blocked areas represent the pieces of land where we want to work or start to develop a plan, an ACUB plan for developing buffers in these regions. And we've got lots of different approaches to that, but this process is just starting out. Obviously, it's a critical one. We've got a range manager and our DPTM sort of pushing that forward, and we're developing it. We're fortunate at Fort Leonard Wood because, geez, I don't know, 48 of the 58 miles around the border of the installation are U.S. Forest Service. So we've got a fair amount of buffer already, but the idea here is to protect those areas that aren't owned by the Forest Service, and try to make sure that we can protect them for longer term viability of the ranges, which are predominantly in this area.
Hi, this is Annette. I'm going to go over briefly some of the things that CERL's been doing to support Fort Leonard Wood. The first year we worked to develop the comprehensive sustainability plan. Actually, several USACE members from different districts participated in the visioning process, and we were able to publish the initial draft plan as a CERL technical report. That's one of the downloadable files that you see there. In FY11, we worked hard to develop EKO Engineering Knowledge Online Virtual Team site to capture all the information that we were using in the meetings to serve as a resource for people. We worked on developing governance documents. How does this process work? How do the teams work? What kind of actual indicators can we use and measure? One of the useful ones, for instance, was the LEED walkability credit. So the new construction that comes in that earns that credit, we keep counting those buildings up to see how walkable the post is getting. We did a lot of work linking Fort Leonard Wood with different experts as they developed their goals and had some certain topic they needed information on. And one of the highlights was Lindsay Pruitt's USACE 2030 design competition. This is the website. This was a screen capture from a while ago, but each of the teams has information in there, and we document all the meetings and presentations that have been given over the years. So it's a good resource. This 2030 project you've probably heard about. We got the team to go to Fort Leonard Wood and use all their skills, and they won the runner-up, I believe it was, Holston Award. And that was very good for Fort Leonard Wood too, because it exposed them to a lot of new ideas. In FY12 we worked a lot with the teams to help really get down to action to start making their goals successful. We've done a lot of training. We participated in the master planning charrette. I should mention Brian Parker, he's the master planner there. And Rich Schneider was able to go to the downtown charrette. Kevin and I went to an earlier version of one. The net zero energy team, CERL's got a big net zero energy research program. We were able to convince them to use Fort Leonard Wood as a case study. And they worked hard to model the energy loads at Fort Leonard Wood so that we could work with the Energy Integration Task Force. They were there to look at if they could put a 10 megawatt or larger renewable power plant. They were looking at, I think it was a 30 megawatt biomass plant. That didn't end up panning out. We held Energy Day, Water Day, Lean Planning Day. We would invite a lot of experts and really focus on one topic. And that seemed to help us get traction with people. Once they could learn enough about some particular topic and see new ideas, it really helped the goal team start moving ahead on those things. We worked hard to develop the Sustainable Ozarks Partnership and get that off the ground. This is a sketch from the master planning charrette of the downtown. Rich Schneider was very proud of this. He worked on this. In FY13, we applied the Net Zero Planner tool. We had 17 researchers go to Fort Leonard Wood at one point in time. And we looked at the current condition at the post and then 25 years out, taking into consideration planned construction and demolition. And then we looked at alternative futures. What kind of technologies could we use, or what kind of retrofit could we do on the buildings to figure out how we could do an integrated energy, water, waste portfolio. We wanted to give them some cost-effective ideas that they could apply. So that we did the baseline assessment, and then the base case is 25 years out. And then this report we're publishing it now, so we can use that to develop projects. So in FY13, they looked at about 500 buildings, and we looked at cogen, and I'll talk more about that. And we did a lot of work on the downtown too, to figure out if we did very efficient buildings, what would the thermal loads be on that. So this net zero planner process, this is what they go through. They establish planning goals, and they look at different building measures and how you can have a mix of supply and distribution. The tool runs all kinds of analysis, and then they can develop an integrated plan. They looked at 4 pilot installations. Fort Leonard Wood was a lucky one. Did the downtown modeling, and each of these buildings, there's an Energy Plus model behind it. And this year, we're looking at all the results of last year, and we're working hard to actually write up projects that can be input into the planning process there. So I'll talk about some of these projects we worked on. A food and landscape waste demo. We looked at deconstruction, recycling, water, energy, and cogen plants, and we're going to look at magnetic bearing chiller compressors. And another thing we're doing, Rich Schneider and I have a lot of research from ASA, IE&E, and ACUB to help implement the new sustainable design policy. So we use Fort Leonard Wood as an installation case study to see how we can transition those new policies to the installation. So let's look at net zero waste. So the food waste composting project was funded. There's a lot of meals each year that are served in the dining facilities. There's an estimated 1 to 2 tons of food waste per day at a cost of $200 per ton. So what we're looking at doing is taking the food waste, it goes through pulpers, and composting it in a rotary drum system. We're looking at the logistics of the whole process, getting the waste out of the dining facilities, collecting it, putting it in the composting system, how long it would take to compost, what the product would be, and then how we can apply that to the training lands. Tom Napier's done a lot of work on World War II wood there. That's the old laundry facility in the top, and this is a warehouse at the bottom. And the other building example is a chapel. And Tom's worked closely with Kansas City and Huntsville to try to change the practices from smashing and bashing up the wood and using it as boiler fuel to really taking the building apart so that the wood can be reused. We've also been looking at recycling. It's very expensive to transport waste from Fort Leonard Wood and throw it out. So we're looking at ways where we can have commingled recycling processes. Steve Cosper and Giselle Rodriguez are the leads on this effort. They've applied one of their basic research projects to this too. They've done dumpster diving for 25 different building types to see what the waste characterization is. And they're going to recommend a better way of recycling at the end of the year. If we look at net zero water, there's a lot of water research that's going on here. The researchers, Elizabeth Janacek and Laura Kirby, are some of the net zero water researchers for the Army. So they've applied a lot of the research projects to this. There's also a mandate to reduce irrigation by 2% between 2010 and 2020. So we looked at irrigation. They've done 2 webinars already. We've installed water meter flow recorders on 9 buildings to determine the water use profiles. We're looking at water meter locations to add. I'll talk more about this later. So we looked overall at water using the AWRS data. You can see the Army target in red and the Fort Leonard Wood water consumption. So they weren't making the water conservation targets. So we looked at it a different way. In this chart, we were looking at population to see if the population was going up and that caused the water use to go up. But actually that wasn't the case. So then we looked at, this chart's quite interesting. So the blue line is the amount of water that's produced at the water plant. They get the water from the river. And the red line is what is going back to the sewage treatment plant. And the temperatures are shown here. So you can tell when it's really hot, they use a lot more water. So we're thinking as part of the loss is irrigation. This chart shows rainfall events, and so a lot of times they get infiltration into the sewage system and heavy rains. So that's another problem that needs to be addressed. The people in Vicksburg did a surface water analysis for net zero water to see if the installation was absorbing more water than they got from the watershed, and no, in fact, it's perfectly fine there. They did the runoff calcs. This is the water team. In June, we went there. We had 4 teams. 3 did building audits, and Elizabeth and I went around and talked to people to try to identify where the difference in the water is between the amount of potable water they made and how much was returned. This is Laura Kirby. She developed the MICA wet, and she applied her research project there. They looked at 27 buildings. They were able to capture a lot of water data. Jorge worked hard on the irrigation. There was one building that had a rainbird system, and then he was able to work with Larry Isaacs from the Air Force. He's got the irrigation calculator. So we got Fort Leonard Wood weather data in. So he's calculated the irrigation estimate for the year for each of these areas. The golf course is using fresh water from the river, but the rest is potable water. So we're now looking at trying to get better controls on the potable water irrigation, or else not irrigating. Like the housing area, the grass has been established, so they probably don't need to run the irrigation system anymore. The water meter flow recorders. We initially found 14 buildings with water meters. We keep finding more now as we look around. But these flow recorders are another research project, and they're able to look at the real patterns of use for these buildings. We've been trying to capture the different buildings for the Net Zero Planner so they can predict water usage on other installations. This is an example. You can see Sunday laundry time. You can see the peak when they do nighttime showers. But you can also see the water use never goes to zero. So in some of these buildings you wonder, is there a leak? Why is there always water running? This is a whisker chart. They use that to show the very minimum water use, or the maximum water use, and then the mean. So you can see that actually when the building's empty, it does go to zero in this case. These are some water recommendations. We're looking at irrigation efficiency improvements, adding a lot more meters so people care about water if they're actually billed. Some of the hot water heating temperatures were too high. We're looking at contracts to make sure they use the appropriate new technology that's WaterSense certified, and also use a metered billing rate versus a fixed rate. We're trying to provide training for all incoming units. These are the fixture rates. Most of you people that work in the Corps on the lead construction probably know about these things. WaterSense is EPA WaterSense. If fixture's been certified with WaterSense, it works. It performs as needed, and it's a good standard to require in all your contracts. We looked at this map to identify where the water meters were, and we tried to figure out if we could put meters on the pipes in the whole network to determine water losses overall. But the way the network is, that didn't work. So now we're looking at putting water meters in the billable customers and the high water using areas. There's a lot of follow-on water work that's going on. One of the key things is to identify the real cost of water, because it makes projects more successful if you can actually use the real cost of water. So Elizabeth Janachek's working with Fort Leonard Wood and other people to try to capture the whole cost of water. If we look at net zero energy, this is just a screen capture out of the Energy Plus energy models. This is what the energy researchers used as their priority of energy efficient measures to use on building retrofits. We did an ESTCP project, rapid energy modeling. I can tell you more about that in a different webinar, but we were planning on having a workshop at Fort Leonard Wood, but we're still working on getting certificates of net worthiness for the Autodesk software. We tested Green Building Studio and Vasari, and it's a very easy to learn tool. It's a really good tool that the Corps and Army installations should be able to use once we get the software on our computers. Julie Webster's been looking at EKOM to take building energy meter data and do energy use profiles. EKOM's a free Microsoft Excel add-on, and I'll show you some examples here. We looked at building 470 in all of our studies. So this is the building. It's a mixed-use facility. There's a lot going on. It's that kind of L-shaped building you see in the drawings. So this is the annual profile. And then we can look at it day of week, or by weekend, weekday, holiday. So you can see weekday uses a lot more. They all have that funky peak, though, between 4 and 6 in the morning when the building starts out. We can look at it by month. So you can see in the summer it's the highest use. You can look at it any particular day. Julie marked these days in red that she thought had peculiar profiles. So something was going on then. Perhaps that's when they do the end of the month reports and everybody's there working. So some of the other things we've done, we've been working on getting Fort Leonard Wood energy projects written up. So we got some Huntsville experts. Dan Carpio, Kelly Polzin, and 2 people from Huntsville came in January to explain how to get ESSP projects. We did a bunch of work on small-scale cogen. I'll talk about that. And we've actually been sending engineers directly to work with the DPW staff to write up projects that are important to them. This is really a success story. So Bill McDaniel, the PM Ford for Kansas City District, read the new Sustainable Design Policy, and he was so impressed with it, the fact that it changes everything, that when you do a project, you really have to think about it and make it as life cycle cost effective as possible. They were going to put in a boiler replacement, and instead of putting the same boiler in, he asked us to look at it for cogen. And the reason we would look at a boiler replacement to think about cogen is because you can use the site energy. You will really reduce the amount of energy it takes to create the hot water, and you'd have a byproduct of electricity. Because the new policy wants us to look at source energy, which is how much total fuel is consumed. And I've got several briefings on this, but basically the amount of energy needed for the Specker loop, there's I think 23 buildings on this loop. If you use cogen, you can reduce the source energy by about 50%. That's a huge amount of energy to create the same amount of heat and cooling. So this is one of those examples where we had to work with the district. We did some analysis and then we sent it back to them, and they're able to continue on their process of designing and building the right system. So in conclusion, I think the close relationship we have with Fort Leonard Wood, CERL, and Kevin Palmer's company and the DPW staff really has let us work together and explore a lot of different ideas. We're able to tech transfer research that's ongoing, solve problems as they come up, and work with the installation and the districts to implement these ideas. We have a lot of ideas for future work if funding's available. So the next slide is our contact information. I should mention Sue Bevelheimer. She works with me on all these projects. We're partners in.
Yes, I have it. I'm going to open up a question
questions?
box on the right-hand side. At the bottom of that white block, you just see it opened up, is a text entry box. Please, if you have any questions, type your questions in there. and enter it in, and it'll come up on a list that only I'll be able to see, or the other hosts or presenters, I think maybe too. But anyway, and then I will read them for the sake of the recording, and then the associated panel people can answer. If you want the question to go to a particular person, please say so in your question. Otherwise, I'll just put them out there for whoever feels so inclined to respond. Thank you each, Annette and Kevin and Mark and Susan, for joining us today. We caught up and are doing pretty good on time, and so we'll see what questions come in, and we'll go from there. It looks like a very interesting project. I know that I work in the office with Lindsay Pruitt, who's leaving us unfortunately, but she did a great job with that 2030 effort, and all the participants. You had like 30 people from across the Corps investigating in that and working on it, and did a really fantastic team building effort.
I was wondering if Mark wanted to say anything at the end.
I hear some audio.
Can you hear me now?
Off, but I don't hear any.
Yeah, I'm good. I don't really have anything else to say. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, Kevin, any final thoughts?
I'm good. I don't really have anything else to say.
None for me.
Okay, we have one question just came in. Thomas Plummer asks, has FLW invested in a builder effort? Builder being all caps, I believe that's referring to the online existing building.
I can answer that. This is Annette. Builder's in my branch. We've talked to Fort Leonard Wood about Builder. Right now the Army's on hold. They've got certain installations that they're doing the Builder assessment on, and we're kind of waiting for the next step on that. But they have not invested their own money in Builder.
On a side note, I hope to be taking a lot of the same questions and content from the infrastructure, the Builder effort, and putting it into a tri-service record card to document the new buildings that we built using the same kind of criteria for consistency. Another one from Fort Bragg has come in. She just says, congratulations on the great work. This process takes time, effort, and dedication. Fort Leonard Wood has done a great job. That's from Linda.
Thank you, Linda.
One thing I'd also like to mention is that the email address for those quizzes I mentioned earlier, we're setting up a new one as well as a new Mercy site for the Sustainability Energy website. An email will go out with a link to that new Mercy site. I'm not sure. I believe you'll have to re-register if you already have a Mercy account. The new email address which will also be sent out, is s_e webinar, all one word, at usace.army.mil. And so you can send your quizzes to that instead of Andy's personal, or not personal, but work email address, individual work email address. So hopefully that announcement will be coming out soon. Not seeing any further questions. I'll just give it one last second there. We do have on the right-hand side over here, we have the Sustainability Energy, the current Sustainability Energy website. Links are available under web links, as well as a link to our webinar, our video channel, so that you can see the past webinar videos, and of course this recording will be uploaded there as well. There's also a link to the DCO webinar troubleshooting page, although if you can see that link, then it might be that you're not having trouble. And then under that block we have the file share block, where we have a lot of information. We have a copy of the Fort Leonard Wood report, sustainability report, as well as the CERL paper and also this presentation. You highlight the name, click on the name you want, and then hit save to your computer if you would like that. I will leave this webinar session open for a while afterwards to give people time to download those files. Some of them are up to 10 megabytes, so they might take a little bit depending on your bandwidth availability. So with that, thank you all again. Thank you all your participants for dialing in today and for our